Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Infowars Nightly News. Tonight is Tuesday, February 19th, 2013. I'm your host, Aaron Dykes. We have a lot of disturbing and important news coming up. Now, on the other side of the break, Jakari Jackson is going to speak with investigative reporter Wayne Madsen on the suspicious death of Phillip Marshall. He's been an author who wrote about 9/11 Truth. He had a lot of insider knowledge on the Mena, Arkansas drug tradings, the Iran-Contra scandal, and a whole lot more, so stay tuned for that. But first, the news. DHS Supplier provides shooting targets of American gun owners. Paul Joseph Watson has this shocking story about how Law Enforcement Targets Incorporated is producing cardboard cutouts of, quote, non-traditional threats. Of course, this is on the heels of the federal government purchasing in excess of 2 billion bullets for non-law enforcement, non-lethal agencies. What the hell is going on? They're producing targets that say do not hesitate, of children, of pregnant women, of elderly men, in summary, of society's most vulnerable and typically most innocent citizens. You just cannot believe these cutouts, but they produce them, and you've really got to ask why, on the heels of Homeland Security and other agencies preparing to deal with the American people, openly stating they consider them to be potential extremists and the enemies in the event of an economic or civil unrest event, anything really they can use to justify a total, literal occupation of America through Homeland Security and related agencies. Now let's roll some of those incredible cardboard cutouts, again, that they say are going to be used by law enforcement who need to get over their hesitation factor for enemies they may encounter, quote, for the first time. And the obvious question is, why is there such a demand for these items, which, again, show nothing other than old ladies? There's a child with a gun, maybe 6 or 7 years old. There's a pregnant woman photographed in a nursery who's the target. Now, why is the officer there with the drawn gun in the nursery in the first place? Does he have a warrant? Has there been due process? Why does he consider this pregnant woman to be the enemy? Why are they planning to take down vulnerable and ordinary Americans? This is really bizarre, and it really should strike a nerve. Something unsettling is happening. This is on the heels of more and more gun confiscation, which we've heard again and again from sheriff, law enforcement, and from Americans in general that they won't put up with, they won't tolerate with, they won't cooperate with, because we have the Second Amendment, because shall not infringe. Democrats introduced a bill to allow police to search home of gun owners. This is happening in Washington State. You've got Senator Adam Klein of Seattle as one of the sponsors. He considers himself a strong civil liberties issue-minded representative, but claims he didn't read the bill that he, of course, sponsored, even though it was only 8 pages. The bill, in addition to its other banning of, assault weapons and clips and so forth, calls for, under SB 5737, the 1 per year visit by police or law enforcement to search homes without a warrant, of course, to see if people have indeed turned in their assault weapons that are, again, banned under this bill. It's caused such an outrage, such a stir, that liberal Democrats in the state and across the country say they're ashamed about the bill and say because of the bill they can see why their friends on the other side of the aisle, why their friends who are Second Amendment defenders are so freaked out by the attempted legislation that they're attempting to shove down the throats of Americans in every state in this country and at the federal level. But, of course, they claim this was introduced by accident, and they have egg on their face, and they didn't really mean it, and they're going to back off. Yeah, you can imagine it probably ended up there for a reason. Oh, by the way, could we have a bill to sponsor legislators to have elementary education so they can learn to read? Could they even be trained to read the Constitution and maybe abide by it and not introduce and sponsor legislation for unwarranted searches of American gun owners' homes just because they say they're civil liberty-minded people? It's disgusting. In other news, the World Wrestling Entertainment has created a racist character to demonize the Tea Party and drawn them in association with Alex Jones, Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, pretty much anyone who opposes the Obama Democrat agenda. Now, again, it's entertainment, but a lot of people take it at face value as a real simulated conflict between gladiatorial warriors. Of course, it's wrestling. 14+ million Americans and others around the world watch this on a weekly basis, on a regular basis, and they've created this character, Jack Swagger, who rolls out with his manager, Zeb Coulter. They spout xenophobic things, not just about immigration, not just about opposing amnesty for illegal aliens, but some rather hateful things, and then they pose in front of a "Don't Tread on Me" flag, throw in a little Bill of Rights and Constitution talk, and then later, as this guy's getting pile-driven by his Mexican wrestler enemy, they say, oh, he gets fan mail from Alex Jones, he gets fan mail from Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck. And what's happening here is this thing where the media is the messaging. It's about the subconscious thought where you associate this guy as being demonized, and he's got this political point of view. Marshall McLuhan, of course, said that the media is the message, and that's the case in many situations. You've got this ritualized, scripted conflict that represents a divide and conquer tactic, represents at the same time this bread and circuses diversion, but the audience is supposed to boo, and in fact they do in these clips. They covered it on the air today. Paul Joseph Watson covered it in his YouTube channel coverage and in his article, where they boo on this Tea Party associated, Alex Jones associated xenophobe, and really just shout him down, and it teaches the audience that anyone with this kind of political view is just wrong. Meanwhile, the city of L.A. is targeting Infowars over, quote, illegally posted signs, which A, weren't posted by Infowars, and B, Alex Jones and anyone else at Infowars did not give instructions to post. They say the, quote, victory you are not alone, United We Stand, was posted somewhere in L.A. downtown, and they sent Free Speech Systems a bill in the mail, not only for the cost of removing the sign, but a administrative fee, they say, is basically just punishment, and expect us to pay when, of course, we didn't tell anyone to post those things. We tell people to spread the word, you know, post things where it's legal and lawful. But this is a matter of due process, because this is happening with traffic tickets. It's happening with other matters where you're cited for something you may or may not have done, guilty until proven innocent, and yet you're slapped with an administrative fee. Doesn't matter what the judge decides. Doesn't really matter if you ever see a judge or have a court date. You're expected to pay this administrative fee, which is completely unconstitutional, goes against most of the Bill of Rights, which have to do with due process and how you get your day in court and how you're innocent until proven guilty. But they don't care. They send out the letters, and they know that 95+% of people will pay. And here they are basically harassing Alex. This has happened from other cities, by the way. I wonder if something greater is in the works, where they're trying to do a guilt by association and really shut down the kind of grassroots-based alternative media that's circulating very rapidly on the internet. Infowars, of course, chief among them. And, you know, LA's Mayor Antonio Villagroso, very closely aligned with Obama, may even see a cabinet position. Now, this next story actually brought me to tears earlier when I first saw it. Not many things do, even though I see so many dark things happening in politics and the history behind the politics. I read up on a lot of this eugenics. It really turns my gut. But I particularly can't stand a lot of this police abuse. And this is a story about a man with Down syndrome who was killed in police custody because he was seeing the movie Zero Dark 30, liked it so much he wanted to remain in his movie theater seat. They told him to leave. He didn't want to comply, and they sent in the off-duty police who were there at the movie theater as, quote, security guards, and somehow it resulted in his death. Adon Salazar wrote the article late this evening. It'll be up later on Infowars. Man with Down syndrome asphyxiated by police. It was, of course, ruled homicide. A Maryland mother is distraught after her 26-year-old son died last month, January 14th, following his encounter with 3 off-duty sheriff's deputies in a movie theater. This took place in Frederick County there in Maryland. And not only did he have Down syndrome, but they say he resisted arrest and started shouting obscenities at them. Well, guess what? I guess you've never encountered a Down syndrome people. Sometimes they act out. They don't always behave, but you've got to tolerate them. You've got to deal with it. You've got to give them a chance to calm down. Rob Dew earlier called people with Down syndrome God's children, and they really are. If anyone's innocent in our society, it's children, it's the elderly, it's mothers, but it's especially people with with mental disabilities, people who can't live necessarily a full life, but are still innocent and sweet and good in so many ways. And really in the case of Robert Saylor, you could see the life in his eyes. I know we have some of the pictures if we could roll that. And I just want to let police know, if this was an accident, so be it, but it's been ruled homicide. It really looks like they went too far. I just want to let you know that Robert Saylor is not your target. The American people are not your target. Pregnant women with guns are not your target. Elderly people defending their homes with shotguns are not your target. Mothers on playgrounds with children are not your target. And children, even if they're holding guns, are not your target. Yet, of course, we've seen this media meme where schools treat children with plastic guns, with drawings of guns, talking about toy guns, with imaginary grenades as the enemy. They arrest them, they put it on their permanent record, they discipline them, they kick them out of school, and it's all sending the message that not only are guns illegal, but that the American people are scum. Well, I'm here to say no to that. Robert Saylor was clearly a wonderful human being who had dignity, who was alive, and we should respect him. We should support a full investigation of this matter, and we need to get past this above-the-law attitude with police. If these sheriff's deputies, if these off-duty cops are found to be guilty of his homicide, of his murder, they need to go to jail, because we've seen far too many cases where justice is not served. And, of course, I've got the article here in the Washington Post. They did do an autopsy, which, in fact, found that he died by asphyxia while in police custody, because, again, they said he resisted arrest sitting in his chair in the movie theater because he was just excited by this movie and wanted to see it again. And they yanked him out and pushed him on the ground, and somehow they say they put him in the position on the ground that it caused him to suffocate. Well, they should have been mindful of that, you little scumbags. You're probably just jealous because you have limited capacities, especially for recognizing humanity, and clearly you didn't recognize the humanity of the least among us. And Jesus, among others, said that what you do to the least of us, you do to me. And that remains true. You need to recognize that factor. But remember the BART cop who murdered Oscar Grant at point-blank range because he didn't pay for an $8 train ticket? Even though he was already in custody, the officer said he thought he was reaching for his taser, but accidentally whipped out his gun and killed this man. And I recognize the police didn't recognize his humanity either. That cop went to trial, was sentenced with 2 years in jail, served 11 months, got out with unqualified parole, where he could not be put back in jail, would not be monitored or required to check in with parole officers. Basically, he was given total immunity after doing just a in-name-only sentence for less than 1 year for pretty much a hardcore murder while he was on duty there. And police, you need to disassociate from these bad apples. You need to call out their bad behavior, distance yourself. Can you imagine police 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, treating people this way? Even if they are criminals, you don't execute them. There's due process for a reason. People have fought for those liberties for hundreds and hundreds of years in history, and you especially don't do it to people with Down syndrome. You especially don't do it to people who are already under your custody, who are already under control. But there's the BART cop killing, caused riots. The guy got off with no time. There's the case you probably didn't even hear about in Seattle a couple years ago of John T. Williams. He was accused of being basically a drunk Indian who the police later testified and tried to make a big stink about was a nuisance to Seattle. And I've analyzed the dash cam footage. They found this guy. He was being rehabilitated for alcoholism. They had taught him to be a whittler with a little carving knife and a piece of wood as therapy to try to deal with his alcoholism. So he would walk around the city just whittling away with this little knife, and a cop pulled up on him. It's shown on dash video, got out of the car and killed him within a matter of seconds with multiple shots, fatally wounding him, saying that he was an imminent threat, even though the cop was in his car. No other individuals were around this man, and they wouldn't even call a grand jury against this cop, even though the dash cam footage is very damning. They settled with the family for about $1.5 million. They're going to put up a statue in his name. Well, they put up a statue for Robert Saylor. Well, it won't bring him back, people. There's other cases. Last week, a couple weeks ago, we covered the NYPD case where Joe Lozito was attacked by a serial killer on the subway, fended him off unarmed. The assailant had been wielding a knife, and there were police standing 2 or 3 feet away behind a closed door who were too cowardly to intervene, even though they were carrying a gun and a baton, but they wouldn't intervene against this killer, and then later took credit for it in the media. And there's other cases. It happens all the time. That's just a few that you hear about. I'm just disgusted. I really was upset all day long about this case with the poor man with Down syndrome, and I really hope we see justice. I got to move on because we've got a lot of things to cover tonight. Bilderberg is in the news again in Italy as they face new elections there. It's coming up at the end of February, I believe February 24th and 25th. And now an Italian lawyer is demanding a public prosecutor investigate the Bilderberg's group and possibly nominating outside of law, outside of the proper roles, Mario Monti, who, as you know, was appointed in 2011 to be the unelected prime minister of Italy, a technocrat who's also a senator for life, and he is a regular Bilderberg attendee, a real favorite there. And so you've got the investigator calling for justice there. We'll see if it happens, but a lot of things happening with that Italian general election. Berlusconi left in a scandal, but he still is the end name backer of his party. There's a lot of back and forth. Mario Monti has his own pool in the Italian elections. It's something to keep an eye on. But I covered this back in mid-November, how Bilderberg called an emergency meeting in Rome to deal with the Mario Monti situation, how he lost public support to deal with the upcoming elections, all the infighting amongst those political parties, and, of course, how to deal with the pigs countries, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain, all of which have this lagging and detrimental, really imploding apocalyptic debt in Europe that they're struggling to contain just enough so that Bilderberg and the other bankers can take control of Europe without fully imploding things, but while, of course, bringing the population to bear. Something to keep an eye on. Anyway, all these serious stories, so many important things happening in the news, and it just seems like they don't get enough traction. Even the really big stories don't go nearly as big as these silly music videos laced with Illuminati messages and really bad sexual behavior and stuff, teaching our children the wrong things. And so how do you cut through the mainstream media? How do you cut through the pop culture and try to get people to pay attention to what's really happening? It's an important part of the Infowars mission. And so we've done a video in the spirit of lightheartedness to try to use an internet meme, to try to use one of these songs as a vector to inject real issues. And I'm talking, of course, about the Harlem Shake. I guess it's a buzz on the internet. I really couldn't explain it to you, but Alex has produced a special video analyzing that and really trying to use it to draw attention to what's really important. Without further ado, can we go to that now, please? And they're pulling that up. We're live, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm not playing games about this information. You're going to get up. Con los terroristas.
And do the Harlem Shake.
The Harlem Shake has gone viral since it first appeared on YouTube back on February 2nd, being seen more than 60 million times. But what's important to note here is that the Harlem Shake's only words are "with the terrorist" or "we are with the terrorist" in Spanish rhythmically over and over and over again. And that's fine. It's a joke. We've many times made the point that they use Homeland Security against marijuana smokers, Amish people selling raw milk. And so the joke is, oh my gosh, look at those evil Amish. They're with Al-Qaeda. I get the joke. My point is that when school children go to school and sing this in English, as people are now doing, "I'm with the terrorist" over and over again, like Gangnam Style, "Hey, sexy lady," will they be thrown in jail? We're seeing 10-year-olds and 8-year-olds charged with probation officers and going to trial for having water guns and cap guns and just playing with their friends. We're seeing people expelled from school, or the police being called for Nerf guns or Hello Kitty bubble guns that project bubbles. Why is the hypocrisy getting so over the top? It's because the establishment is setting the precedent to selectively enforce their thought police edicts. If the globalist mouthpieces of Hollywood and the music industry want to push anti-family, violent garbage and promote mass murder and killing, that's okay. If a song wants to say, "We're with the terrorist," it's just a joke. But when your child's in the front yard playing with a Nerf gun, it's not. When your child talks to friends at school and says, "Let's go play with water guns after school, here's mine," they're going to get arrested and charged. This is part of the thought police system, where they're above the law and they selectively set the rules. So you have been warned. And here's an example of that. I was reading a Billboard article with the creators of this particularly catching jingle, and they said, "We put it out there, we want people to use it, we've told people to use it, but if we choose, we'll block it and claim copyright." That wouldn't hold up in court, but they don't care. Most people don't know their rights, so who knows? They may even block this video because we were mildly critical. In closing, the Harlem Shake and things like Gangnam Style are part of an arrested development promotion system where the social engineers want to basically freeze development of men and women at the age of about 12-year-olds so that we never become serious, focused adults. And having a good time has a place, but you're not supposed to do it 24/7. A free people have a serious and focused mind. I'm Alex Jones reporting for Infowars.com.
There, Alex interjecting some points, and of course it is a double standard. They want everyone through the media to cheer on, quote, "We're with the terrorist." The media always interjects the drug culture, the criminal culture, glamorizes them, but anyone caught up in the drug culture, drug users, well, they go to prison. But when police accidentally or even purposefully kill citizens in incidents, they're immune from the law, they're above the law. And when children play with toy guns, as they're taught through the media and through really hundreds of years of American culture, cowboys and Indians and other games, not that our culture is perfect, but it's part of who we are, well, they become criminals in the system and they're dealt with, so they learn their lesson and learn not to speak out and really not to do anything, all while Homeland Security and the Justice Department have labeled Americans as potential domestic extremists for their political views. And just a minor correction on that point. Last night, David Ortiz was hosting the news and accidentally said that the federal government had purchased 10 billion rounds of ammo when, in fact, they've been found to purchase 2 billion rounds of ammo. Of course, he didn't intend that mistake. He wanted us to make that correction. But they are ramping up regardless. They have enough bullets for a 30-year war plus with Americans with more than 5 rounds per head of the more than 300 million Americans. And I do have it on good authority that Janet Napolitano did have a dream, though, this week about them buying 10 billion rounds just so they could just totally dominate people and walk around and spit out tyrannical eggs. Do we have that footage? I know we've got we're live right now here, but here's Janet Napolitano's dream about 10 billion bullets. They hatch out of here. You see a demon creature flying away, but that's actually 10 billion bullets. They're up to 2 billion right now, but look out. They're not going to stop until they really just break this country. We'll turn now to the quote of the day. It comes from, of course, one of our founding fathers, really the true founder of the Tea Party, of the Sons of Liberty there in Boston, Massachusetts, Sam Adams. Among the natural rights of the colonists are these: first, a right to life; secondly, to liberty; and thirdly, to property, together with the right to defend them in the best manner they can. And if we're not going to defend liberty and our lives and our right to self-defense that even animals possess in our society, then what are we really fighting for? Why are we recognizing any authority if it's just going to be arbitrary law and the citizens are scum and the enforcers are above the law? We've got to rethink this whole thing, get back to the Bill of Rights and Constitution, reclaim our republic. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. On the other side of this break, Jakari Jackson will speak with investigative reporter Wayne Madsen, and they will analyze that case of the suspicious murder of Mr. Marshall. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching the Infowars Nightly News.
New Infowars skateboards by Alien Workshop. Skaters have always been against the grain socially. Now wake up your friends politically. Just go to InfoWarsStore.com. We have divide and conquer or brainwashing. Then take your deck to your local skate shop, pick out your own trucks, your own wheels, and then hit the streets and wake some people up. Here is legendary skateboarder Jake Nunn.
This one has a lot more concave than I have on my board, and I like concave. It makes it easier to turn and feel the board. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's almost the same shape as mine. It's not really a sport, and it's not really art. It's just kind of freedom, you know? I've listened to Alex Jones for a long time, and I love what Infowars does. I've always loved Alien Workshop, too. I think it's kind of cool you guys got together. This one's pretty nice. Definitely one for the wall, one for the collection. Also good to skate.
Get these limited edition decks at InfoWarsStore.com.
This is Jake Nunn. Get these beautiful new skateboards at Infowars.com. Alien Workshop collaboration. Good stuff.
Alex Jones here with a message that could revolutionize health in this country. Going back about a year and a half ago, I began to learn about the incredible health effects of longevity products. Aaron Dykes lost 92 pounds. We're going to show you some before and afters. Aaron, break down what happened, your story.
I've worked really hard with diet and exercise to try to lose weight, but I just didn't get the results. It just didn't happen. Then I saw what you were doing with InfoWarsTeam.com. I wasn't even trying to lose weight, but I got it because I wanted to feel better energy. I wanted that nutrition. Didn't even understand how that could kickstart my own weight loss goals, but the products did that for me. I found myself suddenly losing weight, more energetic, wanting to exercise, wanting to eat the right foods.
And they don't even advertise it as weight loss. I want to challenge our radio listeners to go to InfoWarsTeam.com, sign up as a distributor, and get wholesale pricing discounts at InfoWarsTeam.com.
And welcome back. Thanks to Aaron Dykes for hosting our news portion of our segment. Now, we're going to move now to our interview segment. Now, people know that we've been working for a 30-minute format, and that is indeed our goal. But Alex gave us a few more extra minutes for this interview with Mr. Wayne Madsen of WayneMadsenReport.com. And we have something very important. It's about people who are being targeted, at least so we believe, as one gentleman, as we'll see right here, Mr. Phillip Marshall, an airline pilot who wrote books about 9/11 truth and was allegedly killed, or should I say allegedly murdered his family, as well as himself, in a murder-suicide plot. So we'll talk to him about that and many more things. He joins us now via video Skype. Thanks for joining us, Wayne.
Good to be with you.
Okay, now before we get into all the gory details of this particular case with Mr. Marshall, can you just explain to our audience briefly just what happened in this particular instance?
Well, on the evening of January 31st, that was a Thursday evening, many of the neighbors feel that's when Marshall and his 17-year-old son Alex and his 14-year-old daughter Michaela, along with their pet dog, a small white Shih Tzu named Suki, were shot to death, each with a single bullet. Marshall reportedly a single bullet to the left side of his head. However, the sheriff's department did not investigate this incident until Saturday morning. So that would have been February the 1st, the day before the Super Bowl, which is very critical to this, somewhat critical to this investigation as well. Mm-hmm. The kids didn't show up for school on Friday, so being teens, you know, their friends were Twittering them and Facebooks, and they weren't getting any response. So they were very concerned. They weren't in school. They didn't hear from 4 of them show up at the Marshall house on Saturday morning. Looking through the window by the front door, they noticed there was a body at the end of the hallway. They contacted a neighbor who went right into the house. The door was wide open, unlocked, and saw Phil Marshall laying at the end of that hallway, shot dead. The sheriff was contacted. 911 was called. The sheriff showed up, shooed all those who were not law enforcement away. They then discovered the bodies of the 2 teens on different sections of a sectional couch, a U-shaped sectional couch in the living area, and also they found the dog dead in a bedroom. So they conducted an investigation and quickly ruled the next day that it was beyond a doubt, conclusively, a murder-suicide where Marshall just flipped out, shot his kid, shot his dog, and shot himself. None of the friends of Phil Marshall, his neighbors, none of these people who knew him very well, both in the small town of Murphys, and this occurred in a subdevelopment, a gated community called Forest Meadows. All those who knew Marshall said this was not the person they knew, and they discounted this murder-suicide scenario, but the Sheriff's Department quickly concluded it, and then, before the investigation was completed, authorized professional cleaners to come in and clean the premises.
Open and shut case, just like you said, and all the details of it, we're going to go through many of those points one by one. But before we get too deep into Marshall, let's look at some other examples of alleged murder-suicides. I believe you're familiar with this case, one of Nancy Schaefer, a CPS worker who I believe was untapped to come on the Alex Jones show years ago, and she had some hard-hitting information to deliver on that end, and she was found allegedly killed by her husband, who then killed himself. Taryn Shanky, officer during the Oklahoma City bombing, allegedly slit his wrist, walked, about a mile away from his vehicle, then shot himself. And one lady I'm sure you're familiar with, the D.C. Madam.
Yes, all those, and also Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Gary Webb, not too far away in Sacramento, was allegedly shot himself twice in his head. They ruled it a suicide, and he had been complaining about some harassment from government people before that happened. As a matter of fact, I have to say that one person who knew Marshall very well has a relative who's the head of Homicide for a medium-sized town in the San Francisco area. And this head of Homicide said, look, it happens all the time. We deal with these murders that are made to look like suicides many, many times. So if that's the case in the San Francisco Bay Area, why does that scenario not translate over to the small Calaveras County at the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas? Why does it happen in the Bay Area, not there? Well, I have to say that the Sheriff's Department is not considered one of the top-notch ones. They denied, of course, they denied that there could be any outside involvement, and they also said this is a county matter. They weren't going to bring in external law enforcement. But a few days after Marshall was found, and after the yellow tape was lifted from the crime scene, and after the professional cleaners were seen there were 3 black SUVs spotted in the driveway, one with California state tags, California state government tags, and another one, license undetermined, by the witness, that was bristling with communications antennas off the roof of the vehicle. Also, after that incident, there were 2 unmarked cars in the driveway, and about 5 or 6 investigators were going in and out of the house, the backyard, with flashlights at 9 o'clock in the evening. So clearly there was some interest in this case even after the sheriff had declared it a murder-suicide, case closed, and lifted the yellow tape, thereby contaminating a crime scene.
Exactly, and from what I understand, this particular sheriff's department specialized in meth bust, bringing down meth houses and such as that.
Yeah, the Calaveras County, like I say, it's a small county. The three major towns there are San Andreas, the county seat, Angels Camp, which was popularized by Mark Twain for the frog jumping events there, and also Murphys, which is very close to where Marshall lived, a very small town. So the situation is those who knew Marshall best quickly discounted this suicide notion. Those who did not know him, but may have known him only through the teens that attended the high school, seemed to go along with the sheriff. The local press, I have to say, aside from the Calaveras Enterprise, a 150-year-old newspaper that actually once covered the trial of Black Bart.
Wow.
You know, some of these small papers are struggling to survive. They did pose some questions. They tried to look into it, but another paper, the Union Democrat from Sonora, just really went after Marshall. Called him a killer, a ticking time bomb, ready to snap. And then when his first wife, who he has had no contact with since 1988, his first wife from New Orleans, contacted this paper and just printed what I can only describe as a screed against her ex-husband, calling him violent, calling him all kinds of things. I checked this individual, and it turns out her husband is an auditor for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve for the Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Energy in Louisiana. Obviously, when Marshall is saying that Cheney and Bush were tied up with 9/11 as a false flag attack, obviously you're not going to want to hear anything from anyone with that kind of relationship with a member of the Energy Department and somebody so close to the oil industry, because the oil industry and Mr. Bush and Mr. Cheney are indistinguishable from one another.
Exactly. And speaking of the demonization of Mr. Marshall, we have this article from the Mail Online. Former airline pilot and conspiracy theorist, they had to throw that in there, conspiracy theorist, shot dead his 2 teenage children and his dog before turning the gun on himself. And there's one thing I'd like to point out in this article, if you guys can scroll down to, I think, about the middle of the page. There's a tweet from his daughter, and she said, "Would it be wrong if I threw my cat at my dad?" And that's supposed to be some, I guess, some type of proof that he would murder his daughter because it's surprised a teenager being angry at her father. You know, you can't go out with Johnny this weekend and the kids get mad and they go on Facebook and Twitter or whatever else. But now there are some key points, many of them that you've already mentioned, but I'd like to go a little more in depth. Just details of the apparent murder-suicide, I should say the alleged murder-suicide. One of them is Marshall's involvement in the government, things such as Iran-Contra. Have you found that to be a factual thing, or do you think that has any play in this?
It may well have a lot to do with his murder and those of his kids. Marshall was a contract pilot for the CIA and DEA up until about 1985, when he went to take a job with Eastern Airlines. And then when Eastern Airlines was taken over by Frank Lorenzo, you know, the union-busting business guy, Marshall said he wasn't going to cross any picket lines. He wasn't going to be a scab pilot, so he went over to United, from which he retired for medical reasons later. I know he suffered from a bad knee, was taking medication for that. But what the medical condition was, I did not know. I do not know now. But as far as the daughter saying, should I throw my cat at my dad, Marshall had an incredible sense of humor. He's about 6'2", 6'3", very easygoing. His size certainly was no indication of the fact that he was pretty mellow. He was a pretty mellow guy. On occasion, though, he wasn't paranoid or anything, but he did tell some friends, like, hey, I got to be careful of the stuff I'm writing. And I think the critical issue here is after he wrote his book, The Big Bamboozle, about the 9/11 false flag, that came out around last November, and he was on the AM Coast to Coast, appeared on that show with Susan Lindauer, who also had some revelations about the whole 9/11 war with Iraq situation. Phil Marshall was writing yet another book, and he told one very good friend of his, wait till you see the stuff I'm going to have in this book, this next book. So we don't know what happened to Marshall's computer. Obviously, it's looking through the window. It was ripped out of the wall. We don't know if the sheriff's department still has it, or the family of the estranged wife has it. But I did notice a very interesting thing. When I went to the front of Marshall's house, there were about 8 or 9 empty banker's boxes sitting there. Now, whether they were extras from documents already removed, I don't know, or maybe they had documents that were removed and they threw the empty boxes there. I also know that I was at the Marshall residence looking at it on February 13th. That evening, someone tried to break in through a sliding door in the back of the residence, and it's quite clear. It's quite clear that Marshall has had something that somebody wanted so bad they were willing to kill him and his children and the family dog for.
Now, going point by point here, Wayne, we see that there was no suicide note.
None. No suicide note. And very interesting, although the sheriff has put out the word, no comment, and basically he's pressed many people in the county to say the same thing. And I except for one thing, I got this from this was posted on a local website out in Calaveras County, and it basically, this note states, if the press comes around asking, friends of the teens were to say, tell them that this is a result of a diagnosed mentally ill person getting their hands on a gun. So you see a lot, like after Newtown in Connecticut, you see a lot of hearts and, they're nice gestures, but clearly some people are pushing the anti-gun issue, the agenda. I have to say, Marshall told friends, I had this Glock, 9mm Glock, but a lot of good it'll do me because I don't have any ammunition for it. One thing the sheriff did state, and this was leaked, he said that he found Marshall's wedding ring on a box of 9mm ammo used for the Glock at the scene. Friends said after Marshall was separated from his wife, he never wore his wedding ring ever, and so they were very surprised to see that.
Exactly. Now, we also see the thing of a professional cleaning team brought in. Now, I'm not a CSI expert, but I think a professional cleaning team or anybody who's not, directly, relegated to the scene could potentially mess it up. And another one of my questions is, who would pay for something like that? Would his ex-wife, want to have the house clean for whatever reason?
Well, again, this is kind of very unusual. The estranged wife was actually in Turkey on a trip that Phillip Marshall arranged because he was trying to set her up in an import business to import linens and soaps, specialty soaps and saffron from Turkey. Her background was in buying such things once for Nordstrom's department store. So, it wasn't that it was an acrimonious divorce. They were very friendly. He was trying to set her up in business so she'd have something to do. So it was the sheriff that expressed an interest in getting the professional cleaner in there. Again, it's not certain who was paying for that, although they did bring a local service in. They wanted the sheriff said first bring it in on Sunday after they wrapped up their investigation, but many of those are closed on Sunday. They found one that was willing to work on Sunday, but they didn't do a complete job, so they were back again in the next few days to finish the cleaning job.
Exactly. Now, people said he wasn't so much of a paranoid guy, but he was concerned for his safety. I'd say it's reasonable to say that you want your house being locked, you want your doors locked, your windows locked, and they found the door open at the scene, I believe.
Yes, there was a side door of the house. If you're looking at the house, it would have been on the right-hand side that was led into like a storage area and sort of a false basement storage area. And that door was never used, never opened, and that was found at the scene to be ajar. So here we have the front door wide open, unlocked, and a side door open as well. A side door that was, everyone said that door was never really used and never opened.
Now, this somewhat ties into the suicide note we mentioned earlier, or lack thereof. Is there any reason or indication why this man would not only want to kill himself, but his children?
None whatsoever. As a matter of fact, with his son, he was Little League. He was active with Little League, with the football, high school football, and with a daughter, all school-related things. He was a volunteer parent that would involve himself with these school activities. He had a bit of a sense of humor, so when the daughter said, should I throw the cat at my dad, that would have probably been, as a result of just sort of the joking that they did within that family, fairly normal stuff when you're talking a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old. Right. Obviously, it's it can get and Marshall himself was not what you would call a strict domineering dad, but he was taking care of the kids while their mother was over on his trip to Turkey.
Exactly. Now let's talk about some of the things that Marshall believed in were published in his book, such as things like the 9/11 hijackers being trained in U.S. bases. We see things like guys such as Muhammad Atta and several others. I see Saeed al-Magadi and people such as that. So people who are not familiar with this type of information, what would you tell people about these terrorists who were trained right here on U.S. soil?
Well, I think the perspective that Phil Marshall had is that some of these hijackers, alleged hijackers, had a lot of there was a lot of activity in the southern part of the United States. Some of the same bases that were very key in the Iran-Contra scandal, bases and airfields that Phil Marshall was definitely familiar with. So when we see linkages of Atta and his colleagues to Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, Naval Air Station Pensacola, and other airfields around that area, obviously Marshall had an insight there that many others probably failed to see. Also, it's unclear to me yet whether Marshall had any direct communications with former Florida Senator and Governor Bob Graham, who was the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee on 9/11, but definitely Bob Graham, who's written a novel too called Keys to the Kingdom, where a 71-year-old ex-U.S. senator is run over by a black pickup truck on his farm in Florida. When asked by a colleague of mine what he meant by that, Graham said, "That's me. That's what I think is going to happen to me." So when you have the former head of the Senate Intelligence Committee voicing fears for his safety, who says that the Saudi government, when you say the Saudi government, you got to include the CIA. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. The CIA station chief in the 90s, mid 90s, was this guy Brennan, John Brennan, who Obama wants to be the head of the CIA. So what does he know about 9/11? And did he order the taking out of Phil Marshall and his kids because they could pose some problem for him with his confirmation to be CIA director by the U.S. Senate?
Right. Now, with the death of Marshall, let's say he was taken out, who would benefit from his death? I know you just said the person right there and people in the CIA, but is there anybody else who would potentially benefit from his death?
John Brennan clearly would benefit by not dredging up all that stuff from the 80s and 90s, but also the Bush family. Let's face it, George P. Bush is being groomed for political office in the state of Texas. That's the son of Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush himself is being talked about as a potential presidential candidate in 2016. So herein we have the Bush family, and of course, trying to clean the slate there, possibly. And we always have to look at Cheney. I always thought Cheney had something to do with Gene Palfrey's murder because he figured very prominently in her Pamela Martin and Associates escort business when he was the head of Halliburton.
Right. Now, Wayne, in your research and investigation of this, what do you think the likelihood of a real investigation is? It's not some open and shut, sheriffs say it happened exactly like this, getting a real investigation. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm afraid because of the remoteness of Calaveras County, we've got very small towns there. I'm really concerned that what we could have here is that this case goes nowhere. I think the only way we could move this case forward is people, especially people in California, should put pressure on the Attorney General of the state of California, first of all, and Governor Jerry Brown to say, wait a minute, we're going to take over this case. Now, it doesn't mean the state's going to do any better job than the county sheriff, but they might move some reports. There's 2 reports that are outstanding. They made this conclusion before 2 very critical reports have been issued. One is the toxicology report done on the bodies. That's being done in Sacramento, and the GSR, the gunshot residue report, which is still not completed. So with 2 reports, obviously those in California are in a much better position to put pressure on Governor Brown and the Attorney General of California than anyone outside the state is, unless it would go federal. But I see no indication, or I would have no expectations that anyone could get Attorney General Eric Holder to take an independent look at this.
I doubt he's too busy not releasing the documents for Fast and Furious. Closing remarks, Wayne Madsen.
Well, it concerns me that a person like Phil Marshall and his kids could be disappeared in plain sight. This is what happened, and there was obviously a campaign to discredit this individual by some local media, by county government, and I believe by people who interceded from the federal government and people close to the Central Intelligence Agency. If this continues to take place, we are no better than Argentina and Chile in the 1970s and 80s, when prominent journalists, authors, playwrights, people in government, jurists, lawyers, all disappeared in these countries under fascist junta control. And if that continues in this country, we are no better than those juntas in Latin America, all of which are now thriving democracies, I might add, but we're going to where those countries used to be.
Exactly. Wayne Madsen of WayneMadsenReport.com. Thanks for your time, sir.
Good to be with you.
All right, there goes Wayne Madsen. Now, regardless if you believe in Phillip Marshall's take on 9/11 or not, the thing about this is it's a very suspect murder, suicide, just death in general. Why would this man who had, no violent history, according to his family and friends, just flip out one day and decide to murder not only himself but his children? It's a very chilling thing. Like I said, we talked about Terrence Yankee and the DC Madam and these people who were, I believe at least, targeted for their beliefs. Like Mr. Madsen said, Mr. Marshall may have had some sensitive information about those in government right now and may have been killed just for that. But on the topic of 9/11 that Mr. Marshall wrote about, if you go to the Infowars shop, you can get it right there. You see the 9/11 documentary special, and you can see we have Truth Rising, Martial Law, Masters of Terror, and 9/11, The Road to Tyranny. Get that, check it out, give it to your family and friends. You may know about it, but don't assume that everybody does. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Infowars Nightly News. I'm your host, Jakari Jackson, and we'll see you next time.